Welcome to Ihu Podcast number 1. We are very excited that you have decided to join us. This podcast is presented as part of the Delta College Humanities Through the Arts course, or IHU 101. I'm again very excited to have you join us. I'd like to offer just a few production notes about this, our first podcast. As this is our first attempt at a podcast, we are still in the developmental stages, and so therefore we are going to be, experiencing some difficulties, technical difficulties, production difficulties. So we appreciate your patience greatly as we learn. This podcast is designed to feature local talent as a means of connecting the arts through the human experience of our students and our viewing audience. None of the talent that we use or that you're going to see or listen to on this podcast has received any pay. They are all doing this on a volunteer basis, and we are very, very appreciative of their time and their talents. The first portion of each of these podcasts is going to feature examples of performances by these local artists, and this will be followed by an interview with the talent, in which questions that are written by our students will be submitted to the talent for discussion. So if you like us, please tell us about it. Hit like, and we appreciate you subscribing to our YouTube endeavors in this podcast. We hope to continue offering this podcast to feature local talent in the Tri-City, Bay City, Midland, and Saginaw areas. If you or someone you know is interested in being featured on this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. So please submit your contact information to the email listed below. So we really, again, are excited to get started. So please enjoy podcast number 1, IHU Humanities Through the Arts.
So
Hello, peeps, and welcome to the very first podcast of IHU 101, Humanities Through the Arts. I'm very excited because this is the first time we've ever attempted anything like this, and I'm excited also because we have with us our very first example of a local talent that we are featuring on these podcasts. If you remember, we do have 6 different acts that we're presenting on our show. This is the first. This is Viri Sacre Cantores. So I would like to welcome all of you to the show, and I would like for each of you to introduce yourself to us and tell us just a little bit about what you do. Why don't we start with you, Mr. Avery?
Hi, I'm Nathan Lefevre. I'm a music coordinator for a local parish, and it's good to be here.
Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Brett Burke. I'm a product engineer at Next Tier Automotive.
My name is Chris Tanner, and I'm the campus minister of All Saints Middle and High School in Bay City.
My name is Jonah Israel. I am a broadcast engineer for Dow Chemical.
My name is Chris Wallenfang, and I am a materials engineer at Next Year.
My name is Jonathan Baker, and I am a room lead at Zenders.
All right, well, gentlemen, thank you. And so just You have not been paid anything to make this appearance or to answer any of these questions, okay? Just so we know that this is all above board. So our listening and viewing audience has submitted a series of questions that I would like to present to all of us. I should mention here that in addition to being your professor, I am also the artistic director and conductor of this ensemble. So as I said in the description of what this ensemble is, I mentioned that we had some members who had never sung in an ensemble before. Do you guys feel comfortable in revealing yourselves, those of you who have never sung in an ensemble before? Okay. So I think it's a really cool thing that we've got some people that have never done it before, but also the fact that we were able to produce such a quality product with that. So that demonstrates a great deal of dedication on the part of everyone, but also on the part of, especially I think on the part of those people that cannot or have not participated in this type of ensemble before. So each of these fine men have sung with me now since I believe it was February when we started, something like that. We are missing two of our members due to scheduling conflicts and relocations and things like that, but I'm very happy to have this group, and many of them are on the recording that you heard, which is what you based your questions on. And so what I'd like to do now is to present your questions to this ensemble. And gentlemen, what I'm going to do is just ask the question. Whoever would like to go first, just jump right in there. I might answer as well, and in fact, this first question I probably will. So the first question we have is, how many people normally are in a church choir? And that's kind of a broad question because there's all different types of church choirs. I have participated as a conductor and director of music ministries for several different churches, and I've had as many as 80 people in a church choir. I've had as few as 4 people in a church choir, so it just sort of varies. But I'm going to present that to you guys. Anybody have a take on the average number you might see in a church choir?
It's probably less than 10, right around now.
Okay.
They're usually not that big in most of the churches I've been to.
Normally, from my experience at least, this one's rather small, but in my normal parish, average is about 15 members, but then the Lutheran church in town, their choir is like 30, 40 members almost.
Gotta hand it to those Lutherans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it. Well, okay, so Chris, Tanner, and myself, and Jonah have all participated in the Latin Mass Choir, the Saginaw Latin Mass Choir, and I would say we've averaged around 11 people. There are days when it's less, and there are days when it's more, so it really depends on schedules and things like that. Anybody else want to contribute to any of that?
I think
Go ahead.
11 is about what I've seen at Holy Family from week to week. And then when I go to St. Bridget, their choir usually has like 6 or 8.
Yeah.
So those numbers sound fairly consistent with my experience.
I would agree with that, and of course the pandemic also has had an effect on church choirs all over the world. And by the way, the 80-voice choir that I directed was at a Southern Baptist church. So if that tells you anything, I would love to see an 80-voice choir in a Roman Catholic church. I would love it. I'd love to see an 80-voice men's ensemble, quite frankly. All right, next question. What language do most church choirs sing in? So I will start this with my answer, and then I'm going to open it up. But just because of my own experience, I would have to say that the majority of church choirs sing in English. The majority. It used to not be that way. It used to be, centuries ago, that it was always Latin, because that Latin is the language of the Catholic Church. However, we have different denominations now, and we are saying the Mass in the vernacular, which means we're saying it in the language of the land. So many churches here in the United States in particular and elsewhere will perform or offer their literature in English. The literature that you heard us do was in Latin. So I'm going to let you guys answer that question if you'd like to contribute. What is the language of most church choirs, would you say?
English for sure. There are definitely some old hymns that we still do that most people know that are Latin. But for the most part, English.
Anyone else want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely English, but occasionally even in English choirs there'll be sprinkled in some Latin, small Latin pieces. So.
Unless you go to the Latin Mass.
Right.
And it's not rare for an English Mass to have Latin hymns sprinkled throughout, but it's not just the Mass though. There's also, in the Catholic Church, we have what is called exposition and adoration and benediction, which is a devotion to the Holy Eucharist. And those are usually, the standard is to have hymns, specific hymns for that devotion are in Latin, typically. The O Salutaris and the Tantum Ergo.
Okay. Anybody else? So this leads me to the next question. Why? Why the language of Latin? What is it about Latin that is so important, and I'm adding this word integral to the type of literature that we as an ensemble offer? Now, I'm not going to answer this, and I'm going to let you guys give your answers, and then if I feel an interjection coming on, I will, as you know that I want to do. So why? Why Latin?
First and foremost, it doesn't change. You have to translate. If you want to understand it, you have to translate to your language. The music, the lyrics, everything stays the same when you sing Latin, which is technically, I think, a dead language. But
I think with Latin being the mother language of the church, it's integral to not only a normal worship setting, but also to the music that we do, because with it being the mother language, it is considered a very spiritual and very sacred form of worship, if you're saying it within Latin.
Excellent points.
Yeah, and Latin isn't as like corrupted. It's not other languages.
Corrupted.
Vulgarities.
Okay, all right.
I think that lends to the fact that it is a dead language. It doesn't grow. It's not altered. There's no slang. But also the word Catholic actually means universal. And so because of that, prior to the 1970s, when the Mass changed to be primarily in English, or the vernacular, the local vernacular, you could attend Mass anywhere in the world, and it would be in Latin. And so anyone who was Catholic, who attended Mass, knew what part of the Mass or what was going on, because it was the same throughout the world. It was universal. And in addition to that, the Latin language is actually, it's technically a sacred language for the mere fact that it is one of the three languages that was nailed to the cross. The INRI that we often see at the top of a crucifix, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, that was done in three languages, and one of them was Latin, making it a sacred language because it was nailed to the holy cross of our Lord.
And just to build off that universality, it's not only universal across space, so different countries around the world, but it's also universal across time. So because the Latin language was the language of the church from the beginning, a lot of the pieces that we sing today have been sung for thousands of years. And so there's a connection that you have with the Catholics of the past, the saints, the martyrs, that just really ties home the sense of family and, as Chris said, the Catholic universality of the church.
I'm also just putting this together right now that because the Latin language hasn't changed and doesn't change, relating to the fact that it's a dead language, maybe it being a dead language isn't such a bad thing. I've always thought, I've always been a little unsure of that term, dead language. It kind of rubs me the wrong way, but when I think of it that way, if something that's dead doesn't change, right? And if it doesn't change, maybe that's not always a bad thing. Makes things easier to interpret.
Right, as several of you have alluded to, it hasn't been vulgarized.
Tampered with.
Yes, and the vocabulary has not expanded. So there are certain words that we have now that there would be no direct translation for in Latin.
Mm-hmm.
So excellent points. Anyone else have something they would like to?
I will also say that oftentimes it's misconstrued that people think that the term a dead language means that no one speaks that language or no one uses that language, but the term dead language does not mean that it's not utilized or spoken. It means that it doesn't change, like Chris said.
Right.
Yeah, maybe one more thing to add is it's kind of been insinuated with some of the things we've been saying, but the Latin language, because it's not used as a vernacular today, and it's really only used in the old Catholic Mass, that really helps put up a barrier between the regular everyday world and then what you do when you worship God on Sunday or on any day. It really helps drive home the sense of the sacred, that what the Catholic Mass is something not of this world. And a lot of people kind of have a hesitation there because nobody speaks it, you might not understand what's being said, but that's almost kind of the point. Of course, the Catholic Mass is about us in some respect, but fundamentally it's not about us. It's not about us understanding what's being said and being able to follow along, but it's about worshiping God. And because it's a sacred language and it's the tradition that the church has always celebrated in, it definitely holds that force.
Yeah, and it gives it its identity.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree. And to tack on to what Brett just said, because more than one of you asked the question about the language aspect of what we were singing, I think you as a listener would agree with this. It draws you in. Your own curiosity as to what do they say? What is it that they are trying to convey? What's the message? And the same thing I believe is true of anyone who doesn't know a language. When you begin to hear a foreign tongue, your first response is, well, I don't understand it, but I would like to know more. So it does. It draws people in to want to know more. And just to add a pedagogical aspect onto this, because I am, after all, a vocal professor, language it dictates how we sing. It dictates how we use our vocal mechanism. And Latin is the only language that uses absolutely no diphthongs. There are no bending of vowels in Latin. There are only pure vowels, which makes it the best language for singing that we have. Anything else?
Oh, well, one more thing.
All right.
It's just me in Latin class. As Brett was talking about the word sacred in Latin being a sacred language, I think it's important to know where the word sacred comes from. So the translation of the word sacred or sacre is to cut or to separate, and that's exactly what anything that is sacred does. It separates from the world and it lends itself to the Lord. So like a sacred space would be a church, or even in other religions, a temple or a synagogue or whatever. It's a sacred place. It's a special place. It's set aside or separate and specifically for the Lord. So the Latin language, being a sacred language, is set aside, separate, and it's very special because it's something that is offered to the Lord. Especially since it's not used so much in the everyday life, it's even more special and more set apart and more sacred.
And it just adds to the culture and the atmosphere and everything.
Like our name, Vir Sacre Cantores. What does that translate to? Viri translates to men, Sacre
Sacred.
Cantores.
Singers.
Singers. Okay. All right. Anything else, gents? All right. So, this question, again to the group, what is the normal age or range of ages to sing in a church choir?
I guess like an age.
From 0 to 89.
Well, I think you have to be careful with the 0 part.
No, no. They can sit in church and cry. So you know what?
That's a form of singing.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have an opinion?
I think the youngest Holy Family in Saginaw, which offers the traditional Latin Mass, I think the youngest in the school there is like 13 or something.
Okay.
And our oldest is probably, hopefully she's not watching.
Oh, no, she might be a few years older than me.
Yeah, so she's probably in her, maybe around 60, I would say.
Okay.
I've seen a lot older.
She seems a lot older. Okay.
Yeah, also, I'll say back in the day, but I have no actual time period to reference to. When the choirs were typically only men, in order to get the soprano voices, it was young boys singing, so I know that was pretty common.
Yes, it was. And even in certain circles today, that is the only way that this type of literature that we do is performed according to, and you've heard me use this word before, performance practices. So not to delve into the separation of what is performance practice and what is actual worship, but authenticism in what we offer is another factor in how we deliver the music that we deliver. And if we want to be truly authentic, we do have to look back to what historical practices are. What did they do? Of course, we're sitting in, an air-conditioned modern building with electricity and so forth, and they did not have any of that, but it's as close as we can come. Anything else on the age?
I think it's King's College, I think, in
Cambridge.
England.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they'd be a good example of a wide range of men singing that, from little boys to older.
I would agree with that. Okay, so this group of questions is the second group, and these are more introspective, more personal, so I'm going to leave these questions to each of you. Did you choose to perform this type of music to relieve a certain emotion?
If you consider a longing for objectively beautiful things an emotion, then sure. I had just been introduced to Gregorian chant a few months before this started, and so when Tim brought up the idea, I was super excited, because I also knew that Tim was really good at teaching people how to sing, which he did not pay me to say, by the way, in case you're wondering. And when the idea of singing polyphonies was brought up, polyphony meaning many sounds, many different parts, all together in the same piece of music, that sounded to me like even cooler than Gregorian chant, and I didn't know what that could be. So I was very interested from the beginning. But for me, it was an appeal to things that are beautiful and lift up the soul. I can come and sing for 2 hours with these guys rehearsing, and I'm in some weird funk before I get here, and then afterward I'm like lifted up to the clouds inside, to put it one way. So,
An emotion is relieved.
yes, that is a good way to put it.
It's a great question. Did you choose to perform this type of literature because you wanted to relieve an emotion? I would imagine that there are probably several different ways that you could ask that question, but I think it stands a really good question.
Yeah, kind of going off how Chris started. I don't know if there's a specific emotion you could call it, but before choosing to join this group, I already had an appreciation for the old Latin liturgy and the Latin language. But I wanted a new opportunity to be able to sort of gain an attachment or a familiarity with the people of the past who have done this sort of thing. Kind of what I alluded to earlier with the fact that this has been done for thousands of years, frankly, the same way that we do it today. There's a connection there. And I wanted to grow in that connection. I wanted to be able to think about, the saints of old singing the same things we're doing today, and sort of growing in that sense of Catholic family that spans time. So I don't know what emotion you would call that, but that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it.
Well, I think you could substitute the word emotion with need.
Yeah.
So I think that was a need that you had, and
Yeah.
instead of relieved, it's maybe being fulfilled.
And all part of that was just growing in faith. One of the things that's really fundamental to the Catholic Church is the communion of saints, which is the fact that even if you die, whether you're in purgatory or in heaven, you are still part of the Catholic family. And so one of the ways we can, sort of connect with that family is by singing something that the saints of old would have sung. So yeah.
I would say there may not be, I've been singing long enough and I've done enough choir performances with you in the past where you learn the effect of the music on others. And I think the emotional reaction of others is a motivator. Maybe not for myself anymore. I've been doing it long enough where it's less emotional. I wouldn't say not emotional, but I can still pinpoint points in my life where I was singing with choirs, doing certain things, performances, traveling, and there are some very powerful memories and emotions tied to that. And I would like to be able to perpetuate that for other people, help them experience that same feeling. On top of that, bringing beautiful music to other people, and there's always an emotional reaction to it, whether it's good or bad, but hopefully good.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I feel like for me, definitely too, it was less like trying to get rid of some kind of emotion. I was feeling more trying to feel some kind of emotions or.
So you wanted to feel something.
Yes.
You had a need to feel. Okay, I like that.
I think for this music specifically, the music that we're doing, with its beauty, I don't know if I would say that it adds to an emotional sense, but more of adding beauty to the actual mass itself. I think that's it's not a need, but it's definitely a good thing to to add more glory and more praise and more worship as an offering to our Lord during the Mass specifically, which is when these pieces would normally be sung. So to like assist the congregation in glorifying God through the beauty of the music, I think is maybe relieved, as the question says.
John, anything to add? Okay. All right. Anything else, boys? All right, let's roll on. Do you perform this kind of music more for yourself or for the people listening to you? Now, I know Jonah has pretty much answered that question, but I'll pose that to you, and I am going to interject something here. Often, for me, for myself, there's no other way of saying it other than to say I receive a tremendous blessing when I am performing for the church. I don't look at it as a performance, but I suppose that's one way of looking at it. But for me personally, I do receive something, but I receive the greatest blessing when I hear from people who have gotten something out of Mass or whatever worship service I happen to be performing in. So for me, it works both ways, not just for myself personally, but the reactions of others, as Jonah said a moment ago. Anybody else want to add anything to that? I know this is kind of a different way of asking the same question, but honestly, do you perform more for yourself than you do for other people? And what do you guys think?
I think, one in arts in general, it's both. It's both for it's self-gratifying, and it's also for others to enjoy. That shouldn't be the sole purpose of it, but I think pleasing our Lord first and foremost, and then the overflow would be on ourselves and on those whose ears it falls upon.
Very eloquently said. Very eloquently said. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's probably always going to be both. Obviously learning the music and being able to offer it in a Mass setting, there is a service being done there for others as well as, for ourselves. But just thinking about this question as you just asked it, I don't know if I'm doing it for myself or for others. I almost am starting to think about it as, here is this objective reality that has been given to us from past times and carried on through thousands of years by various people, and it's almost not about us. It's about carrying on that tradition, and it's very humbling to be able to partake in that. There is almost like a selflessness that I kind of feel about it. I'm sure all the guys here would agree, we're not doing it for any self-glory or gratification. It's almost just nice to get together in a small group and just do it for the sake of doing it, because it's something that's always been done and it's something worth continuing. Who are we to say, this is garbage, let's throw it away and do something else? I think you do that at your own peril. So it's an interesting experience to be able to grab a hold of something in the past and sort of just humbly accept it as it is and continue it without adding your own flair to it.
I'm very glad to have you say, grab hold of something that happened in the past, because anyone who's studied anything about sound knows that once a sound is uttered or happens, that its waves continue on and on and on and on and on and on into infinity. And so the very same sounds that were produced back in the 3rd and 4th century are still, those waves are still going on. Maybe weaker and weaker, but they're still going on. And we are simply adding to that. We're not changing it, we're not, we're just sort of catching that wave, if you will, and perpetuating it. So I really like that analogy.
And who are we to say that that's worthless?
Right.
Like we have no idea how how important that is.
Agreed.
To just throw it away like it's nothing is it's sad.
I would agree with that. Anyone else?
I would like to put a little more emphasis on the idea that this is a skill that we have, this gift, being able to sing that needs to be trained and honed. The only way you can do that is by practicing, doing what we're doing. If you want to get good at it, you have to. In order to master it, you have to practice. You have to learn, just like everything else in life. So it's a skill. You get confidence over time. You get better, and it is extremely rewarding to look back over a year or two and look where you started, and look at where you're at now, and that advancement and what you've learned and how you've progressed is extremely rewarding. And it's not like a tool outside of you. It's your own body. It's your own voice, and that goes on forever. The music that we've performed throughout the past decade, it still lives on. You can't forget it. So.
Yeah, it is important to note that we don't just get together and sing. We actually rehearse, we actually learn, we actually employ some technique. So that is an integral part of what we do. It's not just getting together, it's not just singing and letting whatever happens. We actually work on perfecting our craft and making it the best that it possibly can be. Anybody else?
We work on perfecting that little by little, and many things at a time. Usually we're going over 6 or 7 different pieces in one rehearsal, little by little, making it, say, a quarter of the way further through each time. And earlier I mentioned that I had gotten into Gregorian chant just a little bit before this. The first Gregorian chant that I learned last fall was called the Dies Irae, which is usually sung at Requiem Mass, which is a mass for the faithful departed, those who have died.
Just to interject, Dies Irae means literally day of wrath or day of anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's actually in Latin. It's a poem. It has rhyme and meter. It's about death and judgment, and where we'll be received after that. And it's a beautiful meditation. And I was in a conversation with someone about Gregorian chant, and this person mentioned that was a beautiful meditation on death and judgment. And I thought, I should look that up. I think I've heard that one before, and I thought it sounded cool. I'll look it up. And I did, and I decided I want to learn this. And it just so happened that there were 20 stanzas in this Gregorian chant, and 21 days until the next Requiem Mass. So I decided I would learn this before the next Requiem Mass, and I would sing it without looking at the words. So I memorized one stanza a day, coming up with weird mnemonic devices to remember the Latin. And what made me think of this was Jonah saying how gratifying it is to make progress, because I felt that in a very real way. Doing this one day at a time, I was making progress every day for 3 weeks straight, and that was awesome. And it was just such a deep wonder that I experienced during that whole time. So I wanted to mention that.
Sweet.
Pinnacle of dedication.
Anybody else? Why are you personally involved in this ensemble?
Definitely the money.
Yes, we are paid so well to be here.
Well, we don't lose money.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I mean, paying for gas.
Anybody have a thought? Why are you participating in this ensemble?
I think one of the things that we all have spoken about over the past month is the fact that this is very fraternal, and that feels, kind of. It's more than just a bunch of guys just hanging out and like having a beer or just doing whatever. But because singing is it can be such a vulnerable thing, especially at first, and especially if you haven't sung with a group before, because it's so vulnerable and it's so personal. There's a really beautiful connection that, as men, I think is pretty cool. That we share this day together, or this evening, and we get together to work on very beautiful pieces of music.
Yeah, I want to add to that too, like being in an ensemble versus just singing by yourself, it gives you that confidence in group singing.
Anyone else?
We also have fun.
We do have fun.
Yes.
Yeah, don't be fooled. It's not that we don't hang and have beers together.
True.
But it is a bit difficult to drink a beer and sing at the same time.
Yes, it is. Not impossible.
For the record.
Just to touch on something Chris said, often men, particularly in groups, do not equate with the adjective beauty. Think about it. Or making something beautiful necessarily. And especially if that beautiful involves singing and poetry, and in specific Latin. So I think it's kind of cool and unusual. It's rare. You don't find groups like this everywhere. So it's kind of cool that
Which I
to be
think
a part of it.
that kind of lends to how special it is too.
And
It's
the
so
fraternity.
Yeah, yep. And we have very good, solid direction.
Yes,
Musical direction.
so much.
Yeah, well, I'm a charlatan. What can I say? I pretend well. We'll leave it there.
Okay.
Like it's pretty much spoon fed. Like I
Yeah.
said, it's not taken.
Anybody else? Why you're in this ensemble?
Well, this was an opportunity to bring back dead literature, dead music that hasn't been performed.
It went to bed.
It did go to bed for a while, but you don't hear this stuff very often, and none of what you sing is probably going to be something you've heard of. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's not like you see people going around with their AirPods and listening to people chat. I think we're probably some of the few people that do that, but it's an opportunity to bring it to life, shine light on it, share it with other people.
To be different. We're definitely not just your run-of-the-mill singing group, that's for sure.
I would agree.
Relating to what Tim said about those adjectives.
I wouldn't call us run of the mill ever.
That's what I was saying.
But that's great. I don't want to be run of the mill. I don't want to be run of the mill at anything.
And I think people are attracted to things that are different from the rest. Different catches our attention.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what's been said. I mean, this group specifically, on the fraternal aspect, I knew some of these guys going in, and I didn't know others going in. Even just joining this group was pretty intimidating because I had no musical background at all and had never sung before. And like even the first practice I showed up to, I didn't even know if I was a tenor or whatever. And Tim helped me find my voice, and that was really intimidating and embarrassing to go through in front of everyone. But as Chris said, there's a vulnerability there that I think especially among men in our modern day and age, there's a real desire for that our society does not offer. I think it's really important for men to be able to get together and be vulnerable with each other. Not in any weird sense, but just be able to get together and do something meaningful or talk about something meaningful. And I think a lot of guys are really have a need for that. And so that was one of the reasons, and then also the spiritual reason. What we're doing is not purely musical or purely for show or for the performance. There's actual meaning behind the words that we're singing, the setting we sing them in, and this group is the only group in this area that I am aware of who is singing this kind of music. And it was just a great opportunity to grow in knowledge of that and in faith. And to do it alongside these guys who were all just a bunch of normal guys. It's just been an awesome experience. And at the end of the day, it's cool. Like,
Yeah.
it's just cool.
It's just cool.
And it's interesting.
And I have become more secure in my voice too. There is that aspect.
That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Anyone else?
And honestly, it's an excuse to spend time with him. So.
Okay, and on that one, let's move ahead. This is the third group of questions from you. And some of this is repetitive, some I'm going to omit what is actually repetitive. What year were these songs created? So I'm going to answer just because historically speaking, the answer is the first two pieces that you heard, the Benedictus and the Santime, were both from the 16th century. They were written by a composer by the name of Orlando de Lasso, and he probably wrote them. I'm guessing here, we don't have an actual date for both of those pieces as far as when they were created, but I would be very surprised if they were written any later than the mid 16th century. So by the 16th century, of course, we're talking about right now 1500s, right? So we're kind of in the 1500s. What historical period, gentlemen, are we in the 1500s?
Reformation.
Yes, we are in the Reformation, which was a tough time for Catholics, and Orlando de Lasso was no exception to that. He actually went through some persecution for some of the pieces that he wrote because there was so much turmoil going on in the Catholic Church at that time and in various places that he was working. So, an interesting question. Anybody want to add to any of that? Okay, this is a two-parter. Do you see an advantage of being involved in an all-male ensemble? Now, this was sort of alluded to a moment ago, so I'm going to go ahead and read the second part of this question so that we can expound on it. But keeping that in mind, would the same type of music work with a mixed group of men and women? Now, I'm going to again start the ball rolling here because this is kind of a logistics question. But let's take it from the pedagogical and the musical aspect first, and then we'll delve into the other. But a mixed ensemble, meaning men and women singing together, is not unheard of. It was not unheard of even in the 15th century, but it wasn't common. in the 15th century, the majority of choirs, the majority of musicians would have been men, not because of any particular reason other than it was a male-dominated society, a male-dominated church, still is a male-dominated church in that respect. And so it was looked at as a male-dominated profession. But we also had in the 1500s and 1600s, and even before, we had female composers. We even had female singers. So it's not that it wasn't common or that it wasn't done. It just, well, I shouldn't say it wasn't common. It wasn't common. But it was not the norm. The norm was you had a male choir or you had a female choir. You did not have a mixed, what we call today SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass choir. But you do find those from about the 17th century onward. You do find mixed ensembles. So, but the question was, is there an advantage? Would there be any advantage to adding women to this? Well, no. For this specific type of literature that we are performing, the majority of it was intended for male voices. It was not intended for female voices. However, that is not exclusive to Gregorian chant. Gregorian chant was sung by women, and you'll find a lot of recordings even today where it's women voices singing, and it is just as beautiful, just as lovely. I think it depends upon your resources that are available to you and the personal desires of the people that are involved in whatever ensemble you're involved in. We certainly could have a group of women to join us and have a soprano, alto, tenor, bass setting, but that opens up a completely different musical picture and musical library, and we would have to adjust our whole thought processes behind what it is that we are trying to achieve as an ensemble, as a male ensemble. So I think I'm saying that correctly. Not that we're opposed to it, but this is the type of literature that we want to offer, and this is the type of literature that we feel best suits, this is the type of group that we feel best suits the literature that we offer. Jensen, any thoughts on that? Would adding women benefit the music?
It changes it. So you have 3 different groups. You could have an all male, you could have a mixed, or you could have all female. You're going to get a different sound on each one. Certain things are going to sound better depending, depending on the music. If you listen to all 3 of them, you're going to notice different things about it. And the nice thing about an all male choir is you hear the wide variety of male voices, and there's something unique about male voices. Same thing if you wanted to listen to all female voices, you hear the beauty of a female voice, the wide range of it, and there's nothing wrong with having mixed choirs. It's just there's a different sound to it. It produces something different, and you can't produce an all male sounding choir without having an all male choir. Like you have to exclude in order to create what you want to create. So
I would equate it to a little bit of a secular side of things, and any of the all male vocal groups that you might have ever listened to, and then compare that to, and they're very rare that you find at this day and age an all female group that sings harmony. The attraction often is the type harmony that arises from groups of the same sex.
yeah.
Now, one of the things that pedagogically speaking that happens when you have all one type of voice, all male voices, for example, or you can say the same thing about all female voices, is when you have to sing in close position harmony, where the notes are very, very close together, there is no other way to achieve the type of sound unless you have all similar type voices. So, for example, in the Jesu Dulcis Memoria, you heard, and several of you commented on, what is that sound that you're getting in this one particular area. And don't know specifically each of you where you are referring to, but I can only imagine that you're referring to something we call a chord cluster, where there's a great bunch of dissonance happening. There's notes stacked on top of each other. First time these gentlemen experienced that, the smiles on their faces was just wonderful to see, because they got it, they understood that's what we were trying to do. And you know, as the arranger of that piece, I can say that I knew what these male voices were going to be capable of. And so I specifically designed the harmony to fit the text that we were singing. So in that respect, yes, it does matter. It matters that we have all men singing this. Would I be able to achieve the same type of sound with an all-female ensemble? Yes, but I don't feel I would be, personally, I don't feel I would be as pleased with the result, and I don't think the listener would be as pleased. Yes, it would happen. Yes, there would still be the dissonance, but I don't think it would be, I think the word I'm searching for is appealing. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's good to note that preference is okay. You know, it's okay to have a preference. You know, some people like, as you mentioned, there are all male singers that people are familiar with, or female groups that people are familiar with. Imagine if, you know, a male singer sang with the Dixie Chicks, or
Right.
if a female singer is sang with like Boys to Men, how much different that would be. It would just be like inappropriate, weird. Why would that happen? And there are mixed choirs, there are men's ensembles, there are women's ensembles, and I don't think it's anything like we don't want girls in this group. It's that this music lends to men, and that's just what it is. It's like a person who collects cars. You know, they drive specific cars for specific reasons. You know, you like different cars for different reasons, so you choose to drive that one car on this day because of this purpose. You wouldn't take a Porsche to Lowe's to go get lumber. You would use a pickup truck.
If I had a Porsche, I would. Sorry. I had to. Please continue.
That was it.
No, I completely agree, and I would also add to that. This is not something that everyone thinks of when they listen to either an all-male group or an all-female group, but there is something called timbre, and each individual person, their voice is unique, and when you put those voices together, what you're in an ensemble, one of your goals is something called vowel unification. In other words, you try to get everyone to sing the same types of vowels in the same way to get a specific type of blend. It's easier to blend all male voices than it is to blend a mix of male and female voices, because the two mechanisms are different. So, not that it's impossible, I do it all the time, but it's easier, and I think, again, I use that word much more appealing for this type of approach. One more thing about it, remember what I said earlier about authenticity and performance practices. To bring in a mixture of men's and women's voices into this literature would not be authentic. It would not be in keeping with performance practices.
One more thing too, to kind of go back, we're not doing this only for the sake of the music, but we're also doing this for the fraternity. And I think to add the opposite sex to this, it would throw off that the chemistry that we have. And yeah.
Very good point. Very good point. Well, gentlemen, is there anything that you would like to say to our viewing and listening audience before we close this, our first broadcast? Anyone else?
Like in barbershop protests, how we're like, you know, usually men. It's like there's that rich.
This is a barbershop.
Right. Like the rich, like deeper tones.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I absolutely, those of you who know me and have worked with me before know, I loathe barbershop quartets. Loathe them. So to have this equated with a barbershop quartet is sort of a dagger through my heart. No, it's good. It's all good. But no, you are right. You are right. It is primarily male, and yes, because it's a barbershop, you would expect it. So if you had a female quartet, well, there are female barbershop quartets, by the way. There's a whole, it's called Sweet Adeline Society. I'm not going to go into that much further, but they don't call it a salon quartet. They call it a barbershop quartet. It's a big difference. Anything else, guys, before we say goodbye?
Yeah.
No,
No, you did.
if you get tired of the music that you listen to all the time, try older music. It's good.
Yeah, and if any of you would or have an interest in experiencing this type of music in its proper setting, which is the Catholic Latin Mass, there is a Latin Mass in Saginaw every Sunday at 3 p.m. at Holy Family Catholic Church. The choir there and the organist are phenomenal. They do an amazing job. It's incredibly beautiful every Sunday at 3 p.m. So I encourage anyone who's interested, drop on by and witness it for yourself. It's truly incredible.
It's like going back in time.
Yeah, there are like even people calling music old that's 30 years old, 40 years old. Like there's hundreds or even thousands of years of music history to dive into.
It really opens you up to the richness of our history and what has been done for us that isn't always looked at in depth anymore.
And this isn't just the Catholic Church, actually. This is all of Christianity. This is, if you are a Christian, like this is the history of the Christian Church, not just the Catholic Church, although the Catholic Church has remained. But this is Christianity's tradition.
Yeah, in a very funny sense, it's part of our patrimony. It's our, I've heard it called, it's our birthright. And so we should want to go experience it. Yeah.
All right. Well, gentlemen, you have my profound thanks for your participation in the podcast and also in various Sacre Cantores. And hopefully you will join us for the remainder of our series. We do have 5 more acts that we are going to be featuring. I encourage you to watch each of these, and of course those that are in the class, please submit your questions by those deadlines. And if you like us, hit like and subscribe. Thanks very much. Bye.
Love makes me treat you the way that I do. Gee, baby, ain't I good to you? There's nothing too good for a girl that's so true. Gee, baby, ain't I good to you? I bought you a fur coat for Christmas, a diamond ring, a Cadillac car, and everything. Love makes me treat you the way that I do. Gee, baby, ain't I good to you?